Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm here with Paul Zeise, sports columnist for the Post-Gazette, to break down a thrilling 16-13 Steelers victory in Baltimore that kept their playoff hopes alive. I should maybe qualify that a little bit, Paul. I don't know if it was thrilling the whole way through, but certainly that last drive was, one that's going to have a lot of people excited this week. Before we get into everything, what was your, headline takeaway from this game?
I mean, they're a resilient team, very resilient team, and they find ways to win football games. Obviously, Kenny Pickett is picking up where Ben left off last year with respect to winning games at the end and playing football where it's ugly all for most of the game, but the defense keeps them in it, and of course. In tonight's game, and again, I hate to go back to this, but in tonight's game, Tyler Huntley did as much to keep them in it as anything else because he's just so bad. I cannot believe they can't find a better backup quarterback than that guy. And I understand that they are limited, okay, by their offense. They have to have somebody that is mobile or whatever, but they would be much better off if they just said, you know what, if Lamar Jackson's hurt, we're going to modify some things and have a guy that can actually complete passes, because watching that is hard to watch. I mean, he's bad. And that helps. Obviously, when you've got a quarterback that bad on the other side, you know what? You can go 3 and out. You can go 3 and out. You can kick field goals. You can, do all those kinds of things, and you're going to still be in the game. Hey, they're resilient. Kenny Pickett made the plays when he needed to make the plays. Down the stretch, they made some really big plays in that drive to win. They fight, this is the thing about Mike Tomlin's teams. They fight. I mean, you can say whatever you want to say about his playoff record and, whatever in the last 5 or 6 years. And you can, talk about the fact that they've been bouncing around mediocrity here at 8-8, 9-8 last year, whatever it was, 9-7-1 or whatever. But you watch the NFL. There's so many teams that pack it in, but the Steelers have fought every single week. And they have, his culture is a culture of winning and not, believing, for 1 second that you're not going to win. And so, it was a great play at the end there by Kenny Pickett for no question about it. Great play by Najee Harris. They did some really, really good things in that game. And that's all you can really hang your hat on, is the fact that, if you let them hang around, they're going to find a way maybe to beat you. I thought one of the key moments to me was after the Ravens got that really long kickoff return. They threw the ball twice out of 3 times. They were 5 yards, from Justin Tucker's range there, and every point you knew was going to matter. I don't understand why okay, Dobbins got stopped on the first down. Okay, fine. You would rather have Tyler Huntley throwing the ball there? I just didn't get it. I thought that that was a really key point in the game, because I think if they scored 3, if they score 3 there, it might be enough to be over. And so, at the end of the day, the Steelers deserve a lot of credit for hanging in there, for fighting, for finding a way to win at the end of the game, and they just need to keep going and keep doing it. And you know what? Listen, everything that needed to happen happened. And now, you're talking about Miami trying to win a game with Skylar Thompson or whatever his name is. They're playing quarterback for them because it looks like Teddy Bridgewater broke his finger. You got the Patriots, okay, who have to go to Buffalo and win. I mean, the toughest task might be beating Cleveland. that might be the toughest thing out of those 3 things to happen is beating Cleveland, especially if Deshaun Watson plays like he did in the second half today of that game that he played against the Washington today. That might be more difficult than the other 2 things having to happen, because New England stinks. I don't care what they're bad. Okay, they're not going to. If Buffalo is motivated and interested in playing that game, Buffalo is going to win that game in Buffalo, especially if Buffalo needs it, and they're probably going to need it for the number 1 overall seed, right? They're going to play. They're not going to take the game off, so to speak. So that's going to be in Miami. Listen, I've had enough of watching that team play. If I had to watch that team play every single week, I think I might find a different profession, because I got to be honest with you, they are the softest, weakest minded team I've ever seen. Number one, and number two, everyone talks about their coach being this genius, but they play so stupid in the second half. I mean, today you're playing against Mac Jones in an offense that is doing nothing. You're up 4 with about a minute left in the third quarter. It's 3rd and 16, and you throw the ball. And not only does it get picked off and run back for a touchdown, your quarterback breaks his hand trying to make a tackle. It just dumb things like that. So long and short of it is, everything the Steelers needed to happen happened today. And while they don't control their own destiny, so to speak, I don't know about you, but I would say them at home against the Browns is probably the best bet out of those other 2 games we talked about.
Yeah, I think surviving today was the big thing, because today was the day you could, I think, more easily be eliminated. I think the big question now is Buffalo going to have something to play for next week? If they lose to Cincinnati tomorrow, and Kansas City only has to beat Denver to clinch that number 1 seed, I wonder whether we'll see Buffalo playing their starters, because it's very likely they're already going to be locked into the number 2 seed for all practical purposes. But before we get into that conversation, just wanted to remind everyone we have a record audience already tonight. So if you're just joining us for the first time, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to have a lot more Steelers talk this week. Chris Carter, Brian Bacco, Ray Fittipaldo on the North Shore Drive podcast will be talking about this game and talking about the week to come for the Steelers, which is going to be crucial. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the like button to help us out with the YouTube algorithm. And please check out that subscription deal down in the description. $6 for 6 months of access to post-gazette.com. That's a great deal, and it'll get you, whenever the Steelers season ends, you'll have all the coverage you need. So check that out. And if you want to participate in the conversation tonight, please hop into the comments on Facebook or YouTube. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. But Paul, with that being said, got some questions for you now. Let's talk about that final drive a little bit more. It wasn't just that he made the right reads. I think those were some fantastic throws. Collinsworth on the broadcast was saying, if Patrick Mahomes had made that pass to Najee Harris, that's one of the throws that they'd be, putting in his highlight reel for the Hall of Fame. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was a great throw. The one to Sims, I thought, was probably one of the best throws of his career so far. I just don't want to, move on without addressing that was a great drive.
Well, obviously it was. I mean, he threw the ball really well, made some big time throws. Just escaping on that last play for the touchdown. He escaped, the guy had his shirt, really, his jersey. I mean, if the guy really gets a hold of his jersey, he could tackle him, and that's the end of that. From the standpoint of, he has a real chance probably to get a sack, and then you're talking about 10 yards further now. You're probably outside the 20 trying to score a touchdown to win the game. So at the end of the day, it's one of those situations where I think that you really just tip your cap. I mean, he made the plays he needed to make.
The other thing that was really working well for the Steelers offense tonight, they couldn't finish off drives. I think that's going to be, a point of criticism, not only for the next week, but going into the offseason, whenever that begins for the Steelers. They weren't finishing off drives. They weren't explosive. I think we saw the same pattern of long drives without getting those points, without finishing things off. So definitely some valid criticism there, but the running game was fantastic tonight, Paul. Najee Harris and Jalen Warren both were finding holes. The holes were being opened by this offensive line that, going into the season had been much maligned. And this was kind of, one of their best efforts in the last, 3-4 years since this running game's really started to struggle. What can you say about the progress they've made in being a credible rushing offense, especially knowing that throwing the ball has been such a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, is that the offensive line has gotten better each game, and they've gotten better every week. And, the left side of that offensive line is pretty good when they're run blocking, when they're coming off, the ball and blocking. And I think that's the most important thing that we've seen from them, is there is a lot of really good development with that group. And as that group has developed, the running game has developed, And, listen, I don't care what anybody says. And maybe he had the steel plate or all this other stuff. But Najee Harris is running a lot harder than he was at the beginning of the season. Maybe he was hurt, he was hobbled, whatever. But there was a lot of runs he had tonight that earlier in the season, he would have went down as soon as he got hit. And, that was just it. He's running with a lot more purpose now. He's running a lot different than he was before. And I think that's the most, the biggest difference is both of their running backs, Warren and Najee Harris, get tough, hard yards. They really do. And so, I think it's important that they have a chance to continue to develop that way. The big thing, though, is in the last 2 weeks, they've scored 2 touchdowns. that can't be ignored. It's you're lucky that you're playing against one team whose guy apparently, whose quarterback apparently was so disliked or whatever, he got benched and decided to quit the team. And then this week you've got Tyler Huntley, who I'm not sure really if there's another team in the league that he could actually be a backup quarterback for. Like I said, for the Ravens, when you have a team built for Lamar Jackson, you obviously have to have your backup be somebody that can run that offense somewhat and this and that and everything. But, John Harbaugh's been saying it for the last 4 weeks. We've got to be able to complete some passes and get, make some plays in the passing game. They hit Mark Andrews a few times and that, but for the most part, I mean, they can't throw the ball enough to scare you, and it was funny because Chris Collinsworth kept saying on the broadcast, oh, well, the Steelers are, they're showing how you beat the Ravens. You have a 6-man front. Well, you can play a 6-man front with 3 guys over top because you don't have to worry about that passing game. And, to me, I think the biggest waste they have on this team is Deshaun Jackson, because you should at least, if you have him on your team, take 1 or 2 shots down the field to him. I don't understand why you have him on the team, because he's useless to you as a receiver underneath. He's useless, but he can still, stretch the field. And if you're going to try and run the offense they're running with Tyler Huntley at quarterback, you better early in the game or early on in some opportunities, throw the ball. Just tell him, listen, we're going to throw it, air it out down the sidelines. We're going to have Deshaun Watson. We'll get him one-on-one. Let's see if he can make a play. But at least then you will make a team have to worry about, so it's a lot easier to play defense against their running game when the thing about Lamar Jackson is we laugh about, oh, well, he's not, a great passer and all this other stuff. But, as they showed on the broadcast, they score about 11 points more a game when he's in the game. And one of the reasons why is A, he can throw the ball down the field. B, when he runs, he's dynamic as opposed to Huntley, who's not really, all that scary, right? And the other thing is he has the ability to throw on the run. So you have to worry about his speed. You have to worry about him taking off. You have to worry about him throwing it down the field when he's running around. It's a completely different animal when Lamar Jackson is in the game. That's why he's so valuable to them. And this is not to be a commentary on the Ravens, but they have really basically built and staked their entire team around that guy. And he's a guy that's been very injury prone in the last few years. So I don't know what they're going to do. But again, my unsolicited advice would be to find a backup quarterback that can actually throw the ball, because you don't have anybody who's going to be as dynamic as Lamar Jackson running the ball. So you might as well get somebody who might be able to make some plays in the passing game.
Speaking of the passing game, Paul, I want to put a pin in the put a point on this offensive conversation for the Steelers with the receivers tonight. I think the big point of criticism I'd have is between Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, you had 4 catches total. I looked at the box score at the end and I couldn't believe it, but those guys combined for 4 catches. Jaylen Warren led the team with 3 tonight. What's going on there? And there's that connection has to get better between Kenny Pickett and those guys if this offense is ever going to take a next step, right?
Well, I mean, I think part of the problem is Kenny Pickett has developed to the point where why are you not letting him throw the ball earlier in the game? And I think they ran the ball well, and that was great. But guess what? To all the people who are saying, well, they ran the ball really well. Why would you want to throw the ball? They ran how many, 25 plays or something in the first half and had 3 points. Like when you get to about the 30 or 25-yard line, guess what? The field starts to shrink and get a little bit more difficult. And guess what? Guess what happened on the last drive when they actually threw the ball into the end zone a couple of times? They scored a touchdown as opposed to trying to run it in, and then you're in, 3rd and 4, and or whatever. The other team knows you're going to do it. You're in a compact field down there in the red zone, and you know what? You end up kicking field goals. I mean, it's just you have to be able to throw the ball early in the game. You have to be able to air the ball out early in the game. You have to be able to let teams know that this is, that you have to worry about this. And when you get down into the red zone, before you get to the red zone, you need to start taking some shots. I think they have too much. They've handcuffed Kenny Pickett for 3 quarters in some ways. And, it's great. They're able to control the clock and all that other stuff that they want to do. And they're able to come back and win miraculously. But again, you did it against the Raiders. And you did it against the Tyler Huntley-led Ravens team, okay? If you do this against Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, they're going to have 31 points on the board, and you're not going to be able to come back. If you do it against Joe Burrow, like we said, what did they score? 37 in that game? I think the Bengals did. You're not going to be able to come back. And you know what? In the playoffs, I mean, I'd have to look, but you know what? The Steelers are going to be the last team in, which means they're getting one of 3 teams, right? Kansas City, Buffalo, or the Bengals. You're not, against those 3 quarterbacks, you're not going to slop around for 3.5 quarters and win 16-13 or 13. What was it last week? 13-10. You're just not going to do that. You've got to be able to create and generate offense early in the games. And in order to do that, you've got to let Kenny Pickett start to throw the ball more. You got to let him start to throw it a little bit more down the field. And you got to get these receivers and your playmakers involved in the game more. If you don't, okay, then you know what? When he makes his miraculous drive at the end of the playoff game, it'll make the final score 34-13 instead of 34-6. I mean, let's face it, that's reality. I mean, last year we saw it with Ben, right? Okay, they were able to slop together how many wins down the stretch because he would come from behind and they'd win, right? And they'd win, these ugly, really bad games and this and that and everything. And what happened? They played Kansas City. Kansas City scored 6 straight touchdown drives. All right. And at that point, guess what? I think Ben even led 2 drives at the end. They got to 21 points and they lost by 20 plus. So my point is, you've got to start, if you really are serious about winning in the playoffs, you've got to next week, and I know we've got to give ourselves a chance and do this, that, and everything, but next week you've got to at least take some of the shackles off Kenny Pickett and let him throw it earlier in the game.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. It's just you can't live like this, especially with the, for me, it's the finishing drives more than anything else. There's things about this offense that are working, but you don't give the chance for those things to work as well for you if you're not making an explosive play or two. I think this game looks completely different if you hit 2 or 3 long passes down the field and you're running the ball as well as they did today. But because they're not having any downfield success, it just limits your ability to string that one drive. I mean, they started on their 10 and they drove all the way down the field, but because it was dink and dunk all the way down the field, you're gonna break down eventually. I mean, it's the NFL. These defenses are good, especially the Ravens. So I'm picking up everything you're putting down here, Paul. Wanted to talk about the couple defensive issues first. I think we talked about why the Steelers were able to have success, primarily with Tyler Huntley being Baltimore's quarterback. What did you think of the call on Cam Hayward that led to Baltimore's touchdown there in the first half?
I didn't even understand what it was. I mean, it looked like he got pulled down on top of the pile. I have no idea what the call was, to be honest. It was unnecessary roughness. I mean, I have no idea what they were looking at. It was one of those calls that just you just have to wonder, did the referee think he saw something or whatever? And Cam Hayward came out and he was like, I didn't do anything. It was one of those calls that probably the referee thought he saw something and he didn't see it. I mean, that happens from time to time. You just got to kind of say, hey, Let's move on to the next play. As I always say, that's a bad call, and it shouldn't have happened. But there's no rule that says you have to give up a touchdown on the next play either. So I mean, these things happen with referees sometimes, where they see something they think they see, or they think they saw something, and they just don't. They didn't see it, and that's really what happened in that play.
Paul, another thing I want to touch on before we wrap up tonight is special teams. We saw another missed kick from Chris Boswell. We saw the big kick return. We saw multiple penalties. I think Steelers fans want both Danny Smith and Matt Canada to be fired this offseason. But if I'm putting it to you hypothetically, which one's doing a worse job right now for the Steelers?
Matt Canada. I mean, Danny Smith, listen. He's the same. He's been the same for as long as he's been here, right? It's the same thing week after week after week after week. Then all of a sudden they have 1 week where their special teams are pretty good, and all these people come out of the woodwork to defend Danny Smith. You look at where they're ranked in a lot of different areas every single year. You look at the penalties they get on, it seems like they get it on every kickoff return. You look at, key plays like tonight. At the end of the day, right? Sooner or later, somebody's got to say, maybe we need to do something different here. But whatever. I know it's 1/3 of the game. It's not. The offense is so much more important than special teams. If you tell me I have one or the other to go, Matt Canada's got to go. I mean, I'm sorry. I know that, he called a great, final drive. Actually, I'm assuming that Kenny Pickett probably called a lot of those plays in the huddle. But more importantly, or changed them at the line. But more importantly, they scored 16 points, okay? They scored 13 points last week. Their red zone offense is terrible, right? They've scored points really the last two weeks. They've scored points just because they're almost like last year, because their quarterbacks made heroic plays at the end of the game. But for but to me, it's not good enough. And here's the thing that you can't delude yourself into thinking, okay? You can't delude yourself into thinking that they're going to be able to win. I keep hearing about Kenny Pickett and his moxie and all that stuff, and that's great. But it's not a long-haul, long-term way to win football games. It's not. You want to, and I'll give you an example. And these are, Patrick Mahomes pulls some games out at the end, right? So does Joe Burrow. But you know what? They also have a lot of games that they win by 2 touchdowns or by 10 points or by 14 points that they comfortably win because they're making plays earlier in games. And you watch the Chiefs play. Like I said, the Chiefs have become almost boring to me because you almost know how their game's going to go. Mahomes, they're going to just sort of matriculate down the field, right? Mahomes will make a play, this and that and the other thing. They're going to get about 27 points. 28 points, whatever it is. They'll hold the other team to about 16 or 14 or 17 or whatever it is, and they'll win by 10 or 14 points going away almost every single week. Well, again, those are the teams you're going against. And here's the other thing I'm going to tell you. In your own division, Lamar Jackson has not proven he can stay healthy. But if he were able to stay healthy again for a whole year, you'd have to deal with him twice, right? And I guarantee you, if you deal with him twice, you're probably not holding them to 13 points or whatever it was tonight. If he can do a whole lot of other things and make plays, right? You're probably on a night like tonight when they ran the ball as well as they did, despite what the Steelers were trying to do, you're probably not holding, because guess what? Some of those quarterback keepers he's running for. Like when they got inside, after that long kickoff return, he's probably going to run for 5 or 6 yards himself and get you in the field goal range. So my point is, you've got him. You've got Burrow. And I don't know if it's a preview of what's to come next year, but I don't know if you watched the second half of that Browns game. But in the second half of that Browns game today, Deshaun Watson showed why they paid him $250 million. And what I mean by that, and there's a game where, you know what? They scored 24 points, all in the second half, 21, 3 touchdown passes for him. He moved the ball. He made big throw after big throw. He, used his legs to do, a whole lot of different things. point I'm trying to make is you got to play those guys 6 times next year, right? And so if you have to play them 6 times, and then you've got some other guys you've got to play, it's not realistic to believe that you're going to win games by scoring 13 points or 16 points. So, you've got to get rid of Matt Canada, okay? And get an offensive coordinator in here that's going to develop the passing game. It's going to develop Kenny, right? And it's going to make your offense more dynamic than it is. It can still be based. This is the other thing. I'm not talking about, turning it into Texas Tech air raid. I'm talking about getting a very competent passing game. You can still have a run-based offense, right? You can still have an offense that's based on running the football with power and being physical and all that other stuff. You can still do that. But you've got to develop a passing game that makes sense. And their passing game, when your receivers had, what was it, four catches your receivers had? Sims had
Pickens and Johnson had 4. There were a couple other, like Sims had the big one, obviously. Jalen Warren had some, but the two leading receivers had 4 catches.
So that's what I mean. But I'm saying of your receivers, and Sims had 1. I don't think any other receiver had. So they had 5 catches by the receivers in this game. Is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah, I'll pull it up, Paul.
Pull it up, and then you've got a couple by your running backs, and then Freiermuth had 1 or 2, right?
Yeah, five from wide receivers. Then you have 3 from Warren. You have 1 from Harris. You have 2 from Freiermuth. So 5 from the receivers. Everyone else had more than the receivers did.
Right. That's my point. It's not sustainable, and so it's heroic. It's fun watching the way they win these games at the end. Kenny Pickett is because of his local ties is even a little bit extra because we've been rooting for this guy for 5 years and all that other stuff. I get all that. But guess what? It's not sustainable for the long haul. You're not winning games next year like that. You're not going to win game after year. You might win enough to get to 9-8 or whatever, but you're not winning in the playoffs. You're not going to be a team that goes deep into the playoffs. You're not going to beat these teams with these quarterbacks. And even a team, unless here's one caveat. If you're San Francisco and you've got Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey and an offensive coordinator that's really brilliant in terms of how he uses the run game, you can get away with it. But they're dynamic, and if you look at it, I think they're like the 8th leading scoring team in the league. I mean, they scored 37 points today, if I'm not mistaken, to win a game. I mean, but there's an example of being creative with your running game, being run-based, and still being able to score a lot of points because you're dynamic. And one of the reasons why they've got this Brock Purdy guy, and before him it was Garoppolo, and before him it was Lance. If you watch the 49ers, those guys don't have to make really tough throws very often. They make throws to open guys because they do so many other different things. They spread you out. They run at you. They have Deebo Samuels to do a lot of things, right? I mean, they so you can do it if you're going to do that. But again, they scored 37 points today, not 13. And if I'm not mistaken, they played the Raiders today, who held the Steelers to 13 points last week, and they scored 37. You know what I'm saying? And it was like, okay, the game got away from us, which, by the way, is an aside. The Steelers should be glad they didn't see Jarrett Stidham last week because he apparently should have been playing all year long with that Raiders team.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on around the NFL. And before we wrap up, Paul, we've had a lot of new viewers join us since we started. You made the comments about, looking forward. What do you think is going to happen next week? What is your expectation? Do you think the Steelers can beat this Cleveland team that they lost to, earlier in the season? Deshaun Watson seems like he may have started to turn a corner with this offense. Do you think that is going to be the most difficult outcome that they're going to need to get into the playoffs? Because as we mentioned before, Buffalo probably going to be playing for a number 1 seed to beat New England and take them out of the picture. And then you have the quarterback situation in Miami that looks bad for them. So is it really, does it feel like the Steelers somewhat control their own destiny here?
I would think. I'll be surprised if we're not sitting here next week after the game. If I'm not sitting here and we're not talking about the Steelers in the playoffs. I mean, to me, I look at the 3 games. First of all, You either now. There's one caveat, and I don't think it's going to happen. If Tua is cleared and he can play and he's in his right mind, I think the Steelers won't make the playoffs because I think the Dolphins at home with Tua will beat the Jets. But I don't know how they're going to clear him. I mean, it sounds like he's not anywhere close to being, cleared and out of the protocol. So, if you take that caveat off the table, and it's whatever the guy's name is, Tyler Stevenson or whatever his name is. I forget what his name is.
Tyler Thompson.
Tyler, whatever his name is. If it's him, I think the Jets win. I think the Patriots have been, I talk about this, with the Steelers a lot. I think the Patriots are the phoniest team of them all. I mean, their play calling is terrible. Their offensive scheme is terrible. There's not a single player on that offense that scares you even a little bit. They're just so mediocre on the offensive side of the ball. Defense is pretty good. They're okay. I don't think they're great, but they scheme well, and, they're pretty good at being opportunistic. They're going to go into Buffalo and beat Josh Allen and the Bills. Come on, man. So really it's going to come down to the Steelers, and I think Steelers at home against the Browns, they should be favored. Now, I will say this, player for player, if Deshaun Watson is, able to play like 5 years ago, Deshaun Watson, right? Player for player, the Browns are better. I think especially on offense, the Browns are better. But Deshaun Watson is such a wild card here because, I mean, he hasn't been good except for one half of football. So I expect the Steelers to win next week. I expect the other two teams to lose. I think the Steelers will be in the playoffs.
Yeah, kind of unbelievable that we're having that conversation, but we're going to keep having it all week, everyone. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive podcast will be back Monday afternoon, I believe with Ray Fittipaldo, but it could be Brian Bacco. Either way, we're going to have a lot more Steelers talk coming up, so make sure you check that out tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our Steelers content for the rest of the season, because it's going to be a much more interesting ride than I think a lot of us expected. Other than that, Paul, you got a Rose Bowl pick for tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Penn State. I think Penn State's going to win the game. Clifford. I know he takes a lot of heat from Penn State fans, and I get it and I understand it. I know the other kid from Utah is very similar. Very resourceful. I just kind of feel like Sean Clifford's not going to go out a loser. I think he's going to. They're going to find a way to win. They're just their team. If you think about it, their only two losses were to Michigan and Ohio State. I just have a feeling that and they pretty much have everyone but Joey Porter. I'm going to say Penn State's going to win, and it's going to be something like probably like 23-20 type game.
All right, Paul, I like that. So we'll see how that goes tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. Obviously, the Penguins are playing in the Winter Classic as well, 2 p.m. at Fenway Park. So we'll probably have some talk about that on the channel this week too. Paul, thanks for talking to us tonight, and thanks to all of you for turning out. This was a record audience for us. I think I can tell people are excited, so it's going to be an interesting week in Pittsburgh.
All right, we'll see you, man.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.